A name is a strange kind of weapon. It can travel where a fist never could, slip into rooms you've never entered, and put fear into people who have never once seen your face. And in this chapter of Weak Hero, a name begins to move through the underworld of an entire district, whispered from one bruised mouth to the next. Eunjang's White Mamba. Gray Yeon has no idea yet how far that name is about to carry him, or what it's about to drag toward the small, quiet life he's trying so hard to protect. We open in the aftermath of violence. A group of Union thugs lies scattered and groaning, and standing over the wreckage is a boy they completely underestimated. What makes this scene so telling is the confusion of the people who got beaten. They can't quite process it. They came looking for easy prey, for some Eunjang nobody they could push around, and instead they ran headfirst into something that took them apart with terrifying ease. And now they're doing what beaten people always do. They're trying to make sense of it, trying to give the thing that hurt them a name, a shape, an explanation. Eugene Gale is here too, and Eugene is our window into this world, the ordinary, slightly nervous kid who keeps finding himself standing next to extraordinary violence. He watches Gray with that mix of awe and worry that defines their whole friendship. Because Eugene has started to understand something about the quiet boy he's befriended, something that both amazes and frightens him. Gray Yeon is not normal. The calm, studious kid who says he just wants to focus on his exams is also, when pushed, one of the most dangerous fighters Eugene has ever seen. And that contradiction sits at the very center of this entire arc. But the chapter isn't really about the fight. It's about what the fight sets in motion. Because these beaten thugs are not random. They're connected, threads in a much larger web, and when you strike one thread, the whole web trembles. The men Gray humbled have ties that reach upward, into the hierarchy of the Yeongdeungpo Union, and word of what happened is already climbing that ladder. Someone got crushed. Someone at Eunjang did it. And the people who keep track of exactly who is strong and who is weak in this district are beginning to take notice. We get our first real taste, here, of the Union's cold strategic mind at work. Because Eunjang is on their radar now, and the way they talk about dealing with it is chillingly methodical. There's no honor in it, no fair challenge. The plan is to pressure, to isolate, to wait until the target is spread thin and vulnerable and then to strike all at once. Crush them when they're scattered. Break their spirit before you break their bodies. It's the language of an organization that treats conflict like a business problem to be solved efficiently, and it tells you everything about the machine that Gray is unknowingly provoking. And that's the exquisite tension the chapter builds. On one side, you have Gray Yeon, a boy who genuinely, desperately wants to be left alone. He tells anyone who'll listen that he just wants to study, that he has no interest in fights or reputations or territory. And you believe him, because you know where that boy came from, you know the wound that made him, you know he learned the hard way that this world of violence takes everything you love. He is not chasing glory. He is running from it. But the more he fights, even in self-defense, even to protect someone, the louder his name becomes, and the faster the thing he's running from closes in. There's a real poignancy in watching Eugene orbit all of this. He's drawn to Gray, wants to be near him, maybe even wants to be a little more like him. But he also senses the danger radiating off his friend, the way you sense a storm building on the horizon. Their bond is genuine and warm, two boys who found each other in a rough world. And yet the very thing that makes Gray remarkable is the thing that keeps pulling both of them toward the edge of something enormous and dangerous. The Union, meanwhile, is a presence that hangs over the whole chapter without ever fully stepping into the light. We feel its weight in the way people talk, the way names are dropped with a certain reverence and fear, the way even confident fighters lower their voices when the organization comes up. This is the world Gray has stumbled into, or rather, the world that has decided to come for him. And the machinery of it is beginning, slowly and inexorably, to turn in his direction. What I love about this stretch of the story is how it inverts the usual power fantasy. Most stories about a strong protagonist are about him seeking out bigger and bigger challenges. Weak hero does the opposite. Gray Yeon's strength is a burden he'd shed if he could, a magnet he can't switch off, a thing that keeps summoning exactly the trouble he most wants to avoid. Every time he protects someone, every time he refuses to let cruelty go unanswered, he pays for it in attention, in rumor, in the slow tightening of the net around him. Let's talk about why this reluctance makes Gray Yeon such a compelling hero, because it's rare and it's important. Most protagonists in stories like this are hungry. They want to climb, to prove themselves, to become the strongest, to earn respect. Their journey is about ascent. Gray Yeon's journey is about the impossibility of retreat. He has already been to the top of a kind of hell and come back scarred, and all he wants now is to be small, quiet, unremarkable. His arc isn't the thrill of rising. It's the quiet agony of a man who knows exactly what strength costs and would give almost anything not to have to use it again. And that's what gives his fights their weight. When Gray beats these Union thugs, there's no triumphant swell, no sense of a hero relishing his power. There's just a tired inevitability, the feeling of a man doing a thing he wishes he didn't have to do. He fights the way a doctor sets a broken bone, with grim competence and no joy. Because every time he uses his strength, he's reminded of where that strength came from, of the friend he couldn't save, of the price he paid to become this. Victory, for Gray, is never really victory. It's just survival, and a fresh reminder of everything he lost. Consider, too, what the Union's method reveals about the difference between these two forces. The Union thinks in systems, in leverage, in the cold calculus of pressure and isolation. It doesn't fight people so much as manage them, breaking their spirit as efficiently as possible, treating conflict as a problem of logistics. There's something almost bureaucratic about their cruelty, a sense of violence administered rather than felt. And against that machine stands a boy whose every act of violence is intensely personal, rooted in feeling, in loyalty, in the refusal to let cruelty go unanswered. It's the human against the mechanical, and the story knows exactly which one it wants us to root for. The beaten thugs trying to name what hurt them is such a telling image, too. Because it captures the way power works in this world. To be feared, you first have to be known, to have a name that travels. And the Union runs on exactly that currency, on reputation, on the careful accounting of who can beat whom. By crushing these men, Gray has accidentally minted a new name in that economy, a name he never wanted, one that's now circulating beyond his control. He didn't ask to become a legend. But the world's need to explain its own fear has made him one, and there's no taking it back. There's a quiet horror in watching Eugene realize what his friend is. Because Eugene loves Gray, genuinely, the way you love someone who's kind to you when kindness is rare. But he's also beginning to understand that his friend carries something dangerous, something that draws trouble like a lightning rod draws lightning. And Eugene has to reconcile those two truths, the gentle tutor who tells him to study and the fighter who dismantles hardened thugs without breaking a sweat. It's a lot for an ordinary kid to hold, and the story lets us feel the vertigo of it. By the end of the chapter, the pieces are all sliding into place. A legend is being born in the whispers of frightened delinquents. A vast organization is beginning to turn its cold, calculating gaze toward a small school that dared to make waves. And in the middle of it all stands a boy who only ever wanted quiet, holding a strength he never asked for, watching the storm gather that his own power keeps calling down. His story was only getting started. The name Eunjang's White Mamba had just begun its journey through the dark, and everywhere it traveled, it left a trail of fear, curiosity, and the first sparks of a war that was coming whether Gray wanted it or not. There's a quiet joke running underneath this chapter, and it's one of the things that makes Weak Hero so much more than just a fighting story. Because Eugene Gale, having watched his friend dismantle a group of Union thugs, comes to Gray Yun with a request that seems perfectly natural. Teach me to fight. And Gray's answer is not what you'd expect from a legend in the making. He tells Eugene, essentially, to forget about fighting and go study. Go join a cram school. That single exchange says everything about who Gray Yun really is, and about the strange, gentle heart beating underneath all that violence. Think about what that response means, coming from this particular boy. Gray knows, better than almost anyone alive, what the road of fists actually costs. He walked it. It took everything from him. And so when his friend, this soft, ordinary kid, asks to be led down that same road, Gray's instinct is not pride or mentorship. It's protection. Don't do this, he's really saying. Don't become what I became. Go be normal. Go study, go live, go have the future that violence stole from people like me. It's one of the most quietly loving things Gray does in the whole series, disguised as a brush-off. But while Gray is trying to steer his friend towards safety, the world of violence is refusing to stay away. Because this chapter introduces us to a new and dangerous figure from the Union's ranks, a fighter named Forrest Lee, connected to Hyeongshan, one of the schools in the Great Federation. And Forrest Lee is exactly the kind of person Gray wishes didn't exist. He's cruel in the casual way that the truly dangerous often are, the kind who hurts people not out of rage but out of boredom, or strategy, or simple contempt. We watch Forrest Lee go to work, and it's ugly. He targets a smaller, weaker fighter, a nobody, a piece of small fry, and he brutalizes him. But this isn't a personal grudge. It's a message. Forrest Lee is hunting, and what he's hunting for is information. He wants to know about the rumor that's been spreading, the one that's making the Union uneasy. He wants to know about Eunjang's White Mamba. And he's willing to break as many small people as it takes to flush out the answer. This is where the chapter's structure becomes so clever, because it's building the legend of Gray Yun by showing us its effect before it shows us its cause. We, the audience, know exactly who the White Mamba is. We watched him get made in grief and fire. But to the Union, to Forrest Lee, the White Mamba is a mystery, a ghost story, a name attached to a string of beatings that don't make sense. Somebody at that nothing school has been putting down serious fighters. And the not knowing is driving them to hunt. The rumor itself is fascinating to watch spread, because it moves exactly the way real fear moves through a community. The men Gray beat can't just admit they were bested by a scrawny transfer student who wanted to study. That's humiliating. So the story grows in the telling. The White Mamba becomes bigger, scarier, more mythic with every retelling. And Forrest Lee, hearing these whispers, decides the only way to get to the truth is to apply pressure, to squeeze the smaller fish until one of them coughs up a name. What makes this chapter land so well is the contrast it keeps drawing between two completely different visions of strength. On one side, Forrest Lee, who uses his power to dominate the weak, to extract, to terrify, strength as a tool of cruelty. On the other side, Gray Yun, who spends this very chapter trying to talk his friend out of fighting entirely, who uses his own strength almost exclusively to protect. Two fighters, two philosophies, and the story is quietly setting them on a collision course. And beneath it all runs that ache of dramatic irony. Gray just wants peace. He wants to study, wants to keep his head down, wants his friend Eugene to stay safe and ordinary. But every direction he turns, the world of the Union is pressing in, sending its cruel hunters out into the streets, breaking small people to find him. The harder Gray tries to shrink out of the spotlight, the more the spotlight comes searching. It's a trap with no exit, and part of the tragedy is that Gray can feel it closing even as he pretends he can still avoid it. There's also something telling in how Eugene functions here, as the bridge between Gray's two worlds. Eugene wants in on the strength, the excitement, the sense of being protected by someone powerful. He doesn't fully grasp the cost yet. And Gray, who knows that cost intimately, keeps trying to hold his friend back from the fire, keeps pointing him toward books and classrooms and a normal life. It's a small, human tug-of-war, playing out in the shadow of a gathering war. It's worth dwelling on the wisdom hidden in Gray's advice to Eugene, because it's easy to miss how profound it is. When Gray tells his friend to forget fighting and go study, he's not being dismissive. He's offering Eugene the one thing Gray himself was denied, a normal path, a future that doesn't run through violence. Gray never got to just be a student. His childhood was hijacked by tragedy and turned into a forge that made him into a weapon. And now, given the chance, he's trying to hand his friend the ordinary life that was stolen from him. There's something almost paternal in it, a survivor trying to spare someone else his own fate. And it reframes what strength even means in this story. Eugene assumes that strength is the ability to fight, and so he wants Gray to teach him to fight. But Gray understands a deeper truth, that the real strength, the rarer kind, is the strength to build a life, to study, to endure the slow unglamorous work of becoming something. Anyone can throw a punch. Far fewer people can sit with a textbook night after night and construct a future out of discipline. Gray is trying to point Eugene toward that harder, better strength, even if Eugene can't quite see it yet. Meanwhile, Forrest Lee stands as the dark mirror of that whole philosophy. Where Gray uses strength to protect and tries to steer his friend toward peace, Forrest Lee uses strength to extract, to terrorize, to hunt. Watch how he treats the small fry he brutalizes, not as a person but as a tool, a means to an end, someone to be broken open for the information inside. That's the Union's whole ethic distilled into one cruel figure. People are resources. Pain is a method. And the weak exist to be used by the strong. Everything Gray stands against is embodied in the casual, contemptuous way Forrest Lee goes about his hunt. There's also a grim comedy in the gap between what the Union is hunting and what it will actually find. Forrest Lee is out there breaking bones to uncover some fearsome monster, some brutal legend worthy of the Union's concern. And the truth waiting at the end of his hunt is a bookish, grieving boy who spent this very chapter telling his friend to go study. The Union has built a myth in its own mind, a bogeyman to explain its humiliation, and it's about to come face to face with the far stranger, far more dangerous reality, a fighter who wants nothing the Union knows how to take away. By the chapter's end, the lines are being drawn. Forrest Lee is out there, hunting the White Mamba through the bodies of the weak. The Union's unease is turning into active investigation. And Gray Yun, the boy at the center of the whole gathering storm, is still trying to convince his friend, and maybe himself, that the smart move is to walk away from all of it and open a textbook. His story was only getting started. But the world had already decided it wasn't going to let him stay quiet, and somewhere out in the district, a cruel man was breaking bones to learn a name that would eventually lead him straight to Gray's door. Legends are built out of exaggeration, and this chapter shows us exactly how a myth takes shape in the dark. Because the rumor of Eunjang's White Mamba has stopped being a simple story about a strong fighter. It has metastasized into something monstrous. People are whispering that he stabs his enemies with a pen. That he crushes skulls with rocks. That he uses the most underhanded, brutal tactics imaginable. The truth, that he's a grieving boy who just wants to study and can't stop protecting people, has been buried under a mountain of fearful invention. And that gap between the real Gray Yun and the myth of the White Mamba is where so much of this chapter's tension lives. There's something almost tragic in watching this happen. Because the person these rumors describe, a vicious, underhanded monster, is the exact opposite of who Gray actually is. Gray fights clean, fights only when pushed, fights to shield the weak. But that's not the story that travels. Fear doesn't tell accurate stories. Fear inflates, distorts, turns a defensive boy into a boogeyman. And every wild retelling makes the Union more determined to find him, more convinced that this White Mamba is a genuine threat that has to be dealt with. The chapter also reaches back into the past, and it's an important piece of the puzzle. We learn about the Battle of the Underpass, a confrontation from last year in which Eunjang lost, in which the school was humbled and diminished. This is the history that explains the present. Eunjang has been a fallen power, a school that got beaten down and never fully recovered, its fighters scattered or broken. Which is exactly why the sudden emergence of the White Mamba is so destabilizing. A school that was supposed to be finished is suddenly producing a fighter who can crush Union muscle. The old order is being disturbed, and the Union does not like disturbances. And looming over everything is a name spoken with real weight. Donald Na. The ruler of the whole federation drops word that he'll be seeing everyone at the assembly, and that single message lands like a stone in still water. Because when the man at the top starts paying attention, everything changes. The White Mamba is no longer just a street rumor for mid-level thugs to worry about. He's become significant enough that the apex of the entire Union structure has taken note. An assembly is coming, and you can feel the gravity of it pulling the whole story towards some kind of reckoning. There's a beautiful bit of characterization threaded through all of this, in the way the story describes Gray Yun's actual nature. He is not, we're reminded, someone who goes looking for conflict. He doesn't want territory or reputation or the thrill of a fight. But, and this is the crucial part, he is also not someone who will simply stand by and let things happen. He won't seek out war. But if cruelty puts itself in front of him, if someone weak is being ground down, he will not look away. That's the razor's edge Gray walks, and it's what makes him so dangerous to a world that assumes everyone can be either intimidated or ignored. The people of the Union are grappling with this new variable, and you can see them trying to fit it into their existing categories. Is the White Mamba connected to some larger power? Is he a lone wolf? Is he as brutal as the rumors say, or is that just the wounded pride of the men he beat talking? They keep circling the mystery, and their inability to solve it is precisely what makes it so threatening. An enemy you understand can be managed. An enemy who doesn't fit your model, whose motives you can't read, is the thing that keeps strategists up at night. And that's the deeper theme humming under this chapter. The Union runs on knowledge, on hierarchy, on the careful tracking of who's strong and who's weak, who owes what to whom. It's a machine of information and control. But the White Mamba is a blank space in their map, a fighter powered by something they haven't accounted for. They're used to people who want the ordinary things, power, status, safety. They have no framework for a boy who wants none of it, who fights only to protect and would rather be left alone with his books. You can feel the story tightening as the assembly approaches. It's the kind of event that gathers all the players into one place, that forces the scattered threads of the plot toward a single point. Donald Na will be there. The Union's power will be on full display. And hanging over it all is the question that the whole Federation is now asking. Who is Eunjang's White Mamba, and what is the school going to do about the storm his existence has stirred up? Let's sit with the psychology of how these rumors work, because Weak Hero is genuinely sharp about it. When a group of proud, violent young men get beaten by someone they underestimated, they face a choice. They can admit the humiliating truth, that a scrawny transfer student who just wanted to study took them apart. Or they can invent a monster. And the monster is always easier to live with. If the White Mamba is a vicious, underhanded killer who stabs with pens and crushes skulls with rocks, then losing to him isn't shameful, it's practically inevitable. The rumor isn't really about Gray at all. It's about the wounded egos of the men he beat, reshaping reality to protect themselves. But those self-serving lies have consequences that ripple far beyond the men who tell them. Because every exaggeration makes Gray seem more dangerous, and the more dangerous he seems, the more the Union feels it has to respond. A rumor that started as a way for beaten thugs to save face is now, brick by brick, constructing the very threat that will justify an all-out assault. Gray is being written into a role he never chose, cast as the villain of someone else's story, and the script is spiraling toward a war he never wanted. It's a chilling demonstration of how fear manufactures its own justifications. The Battle of the Underpass matters so much here because it gives the present its emotional gravity. Eunjang isn't a proud power casually brushing off a threat. It's a wounded, humbled school still living in the shadow of a defeat, still carrying the memory of being beaten down. That history is why the White Mamba's emergence feels so charged, so full of possibility and danger. For Eunjang, he represents something almost unbearable, hope. The hope that maybe this time things could be different, that maybe the school that lost could rise again. And hope, in a world this cruel, is a dangerous thing to carry, because it gives the enemy something new to take away. Donald Na's shadow falling across the chapter changes the whole temperature of the story. Up to now, the White Mamba has been a mid-level problem, something for street fighters and school bosses to worry about. But when the ruler of the entire federation takes notice, when his word about the coming assembly lands in the middle of everything, the stakes leap upward. This is no longer a neighborhood squabble. It's become significant enough to draw the attention of the apex predator of the whole district. And Donald Na doesn't waste his attention on trivial things, which means he's already calculating, already fitting the White Mamba into some larger design. And that razor's edge in Gray's nature is really the key to the whole series, so it bears repeating. He is not a seeker of violence. He would genuinely rather study, rather be left alone, rather never throw another punch. But he is also constitutionally incapable of standing by while the weak are ground down. Those two facts, taken together, make him the most unpredictable force in the entire story. The Union can predict people who want power, or safety, or status. It cannot predict a boy who wants only peace but will shatter that peace the instant someone vulnerable is threatened. That contradiction is a weapon the Union has no defense against. There's something almost mythic in the way the rumor keeps outrunning the truth. The real Gray Yeon sits quietly with his books, tutoring a friend, trying to disappear. And meanwhile, out in the dark, a monstrous version of him is being born in whispers, growing more terrible with every retelling, gathering the attention of kings. Two Gray Yeons now exist, the gentle boy and the fearsome legend, and the tragedy is that the legend is the one steering his fate. The quieter he tries to be, the louder his myth becomes. By the chapter's close, the legend has taken on a life of its own, growing more monstrous with every whisper, pulling the attention of the most powerful figures in the district toward a boy who wants none of it. The past has been dredged up, the assembly has been called, and the machinery of the Union is grinding toward Eunjang with slow, patient inevitability. His story was only getting started. And the myth of the White Mamba, so much larger and darker than the gentle, grieving boy who inspired it, was about to collide with the truth in ways no one, not even Donald Na, could fully predict. To understand the war that's coming, you first have to understand the kingdom, and this chapter finally pulls back the curtain on the full shape of the Yeongdeungpo Union. It's like being handed a map of a battlefield you're about to fight on, and what that map reveals is genuinely intimidating. This isn't one gang or one school. It's a federation, a structured empire of delinquent power, and Gray Yeon has wandered right into the middle of it. The chapter opens with a fresh spark of danger. A fighter named Robin Ha, connected to Hyeongshan, is the kind of person the story describes as a total street fight addict, a boy who lives for violence the way other people live for food or sleep. And Robin Ha does something bold. He steps to Ben Park, one of Eunjang's key figures, with an open challenge. Would you like to fight me? It's provocation as a way of life, a fighter so hungry for combat that he goes looking for the strongest people just to test himself against them. And it's a signal, one more sign that the pressure on Eunjang is mounting from every direction. But the heart of this chapter is the education it gives us, delivered through Eugene, about how the Union is actually built. Because the Yeongdeungpo Union is a coalition of schools, each with its own territory, its own fighters, its own reputation, all bound together under a single overarching power. There are the different regions, the different banners, and at the very center of the whole structure sits the man we've heard so much about. Donald Na. The absolute ruler. The one whose authority holds the entire federation together. And the roster of powers is chilling in its scope. There's Sangnam, whose fighter wolf Keum wears a red blazer that the story calls a symbol of fear on the streets, a boy whose reputation alone makes people step aside. There's Hyeongshin, producing hunters like Forrest Lee and addicts like Robin Ha. There's Daehyun, with its own dangerous names. Each of these schools is a power in its own right, and together, unified under Donald Na, they form something close to unstoppable. This is the machine. This is the thing that has decided to notice Eunjang. What makes the world building here so effective is that it recasts everything we thought we understood about scale. Gray's earlier fights, the thugs he beat, the rumors he sparked, all of that suddenly feels small against the backdrop of this vast organization. He's been fighting foot soldiers. What this chapter reveals is the size of the army behind them. And you feel, along with Eugene, a growing dread as the true dimensions of the threat come into focus. This is so much bigger than one boy, one school, one grudge. The chapter also fills in a crucial piece of history about Donald Na's rise. We learn that he became the number one figure, the absolute ruler, in the wake of a fighter named Miles Ju being excommunicated, cast out of the Union. That detail matters, because it tells us that Donald Na's throne wasn't just handed to him. There was a power struggle, a purge, a clearing of the field. Donald Na didn't merely inherit his kingdom. He engineered his way to the top of it, outmaneuvering rivals, consolidating control, until there was no one left above him. It's another brushstroke in the portrait of a strategist who thinks several moves ahead of everyone around him. And that's the contrast the whole story is building toward. On one side, this immense, organized, carefully structured empire, run by a mind that treats power like a game of chess. On the other side, a single boy who wants nothing to do with any of it, whose strength comes not from ambition but from grief and loyalty. The Union is a machine built to absorb or crush anyone who matters. Gray Yeon is the one thing it wasn't designed to handle, precisely because he doesn't want the things the machine knows how to offer or threaten. There's a real sense, in this chapter, of the walls of the world becoming visible. Every fighter has a place in the hierarchy. Every school has its rank, its territory, its role. Robin Ha challenging Ben. Park isn't random chaos, it's a piece of a larger pattern, the Union testing Eunjang, probing its defenses, measuring its strength before the real assault. And Donald Na sits above it all, watching, calculating, letting his pieces move while he waits for the moment to close his hand. The dread the chapter generates is the good kind, the kind that makes you lean forward. Because now we understand what Gray is really up against. Not a gang, but a kingdom. Not a bully, but a conqueror with an entire federation at his command. The map has been drawn, the players named, the sheer scale of the threat made clear. And somewhere in the middle of that map is a small, battered school and a boy who only wanted to study. Let's linger on Robin Ha for a moment, because he represents a specific and fascinating type of danger. He's not driven by strategy like Donald Na, or by cruelty for profit like Forrest Lee. He's driven by pure appetite. Robin-ha fights because fighting is the only thing that makes him feel alive, and that makes him unpredictable in a way that calculated enemies never are. He'll walk up to the strongest person in the room and pick a fight for no reason other than the hunger to test himself. There's something almost pitiable in it, a boy so hollowed out that only violence can fill him, and something genuinely frightening, because a person with nothing to lose and everything to prove is a person who doesn't stop. And placing him against Ben Park is a smart bit of storytelling, because it shows us that the pressure on Eunjang comes in many forms. It's not just Donald Na's cold strategy. It's not just Forrest Lee's cruel hunting. It's also chaos agents like Robin-ha, who don't need a plan or a reason, who just want to fight and will happily throw Eunjang into turmoil for the sheer joy of it. The Union's threat is multifaceted, coming at Eunjang from every psychological angle at once, and that variety is part of what makes it feel so overwhelming. The genius of the Union structure, laid out so clearly here, is that it converts individual strength into collective power. Any one of these fighters, Wolf Keum in his fearsome red blazer, Forrest Lee, Robin-ha, would be a formidable threat on his own. But bound together under Donald Na, they become something far greater than the sum of their parts, a coordinated force that can bring overwhelming pressure to bear on any single target. That's the innovation Donald Na brought to the district. He took a scattered collection of strong individuals and welded them into a machine. And the machine is so much harder to fight than any one man. The detail about Miles Jew's excommunication rewards close attention, because it hints at the ruthlessness underneath Donald Na's polished exterior. Thrones aren't won gently. For Donald Na to rise to the absolute top, rivals had to fall, and the casting out of Miles Jew is the fossil record of that struggle, evidence of a purge, of enemies removed, of a field cleared through cunning and force. It reminds us that Donald Na is not a benevolent administrator. He's a conqueror who climbed over others to reach the summit, and who maintains his position through the same clear-eyed willingness to eliminate anything that threatens him. And all of this sharpens the central, almost impossible question the story is building toward. How does one boy stand against a kingdom? Every rational assessment says he can't. The Union has the numbers, the structure, the strategy, the ruler. Eunjang has a handful of fighters and a wounded history. By any conventional measure, this is not a contest. And yet the story keeps whispering that conventional measures might not apply here, that there's something about Gray Yeon, something rooted in his refusal to want what the Union offers, that the whole vast machine has no way to account for. The mismatch is real. But so is the sense that the Union has miscalculated in some way it can't yet see. By the chapter's end, the shape of the coming war has come into terrible focus. The Union stands revealed in all its organized might. Its schools and fighters and hierarchies laid bare, its ruler waiting at the center like a spider at the heart of a web. Robin-ha's challenge is just the first tremor. His story was only getting started. And the White Mamba, one wounded boy against an empire, was about to discover exactly how vast the thing he'd stirred up truly was. The kingdom keeps growing more detailed, and with every name this chapter adds to the Union's roster, the threat facing Eunjang feels heavier and more real. Because weak hero understands something important about tension. The more concrete and specific the enemy becomes, the more frightening it is. A vague menace is easy to dismiss. A named, ranked, structured army of dangerous fighters is something else entirely, and that's exactly what this chapter builds. We continue the tour of the Yeongdeungpo Union's power players, and each one is drawn with enough personality to feel like a genuine threat rather than just a face in a crowd. There's Dean Kwon of Daehyun, a figure of real standing in the hierarchy, one of the names spoken with respect and caution. There's Jake G, another Daehyun fighter, part of the web of strength that makes the Union so formidable. These aren't disposable thugs. They're established powers, each with a reputation, each a piece of the machine that's turning toward Eunjang. Running underneath the introductions is a current of genuine urgency, an emergency taking shape around Ben Park and the other Eunjang figures. Because the Union isn't just idly cataloging its own strength. It's mobilizing. The pieces are being positioned. The talk among the Union's fighters is turning from rumor and curiosity into planning, into the practical question of how to move against Eunjang and finish what the Battle of the Underpass started. You can feel the gears engaging, the vague threat becoming an active operation. And the White Mamba rumor keeps spreading through all of it, now with a source coming into focus. The story points to a figure named Hugo Yeon, described as having a real knack for spreading stories, for name-making, for turning whispers into legends. It's a fascinating little detail, because it shows us that the myth of the White Mamba isn't just spreading by accident. It's being amplified, shaped, carried by people who trade in reputation and rumor. The legend of Grey Yun is partly the work of storytellers, of the district's own gossip machine, inflating him into something larger than life. There's a real irony in that, when you sit with it. Grey Yun, the boy who wants nothing more than to disappear into a quiet, ordinary life, is being turned into a district-wide legend by people he's never met, for reasons that have nothing to do with who he actually is. The rumor mill doesn't care about the truth. It cares about a good story, and a mysterious, brutal fighter emerging from a fallen school is a very good story indeed. Every retelling pulls Grey further from the anonymity he craves and deeper into a spotlight he never wanted. What makes this stretch of world-building work so well is that it keeps the human stakes visible even as the scope expands. Because behind all these names and ranks and territories are the people Grey actually cares about. Ben Park. The other Eunjang fighters. Eugene. The Union's growing attention isn't an abstract threat, it's a danger closing in on specific people, on a school full of underdogs who are about to become the target of an organized assault. The bigger the Union looks, the more vulnerable Eunjang feels by comparison. And the chapter keeps reminding us of the fundamental mismatch at the heart of the coming conflict. On one side, a vast, coordinated federation with layers of powerful fighters, sophisticated strategy, and a brilliant ruler orchestrating it all. On the other side, a battered school that already lost once, a handful of fighters, and one reluctant boy whose legend has outgrown him. By every conventional measure, it's not a fair fight. The Union has everything, the numbers, the organization, the momentum. Eunjang has almost nothing, except for the one variable no amount of strategy can fully account for. There's a patience to the way the Union operates that's genuinely unnerving. They're not rushing in blindly. They're gathering information, mapping their target, positioning their people, letting the pressure build. This is a predator that stalks before it strikes, that wants to understand its prey completely before it moves in for the kill. And that methodical, unhurried approach is scarier than any berserker rage, because it speaks to a level of control and confidence that suggests the Union believes the outcome is already decided. But the story keeps planting little seeds of doubt in that confidence, and they all point back to the White Mamba. The Union thinks it knows how these things go. It thinks it has Eunjang measured and understood. What it hasn't accounted for is a fighter who doesn't fit any of their models, whose motives they can't read, whose strength comes from a place their whole system of rewards and threats can't reach. Every name they add to their side of the ledger only sharpens the question of whether their careful arithmetic has left something crucial out. Let's think about what the figure of Hugo Yeon, the rumor spreader, really tells us about power in this world. Because it turns out that reputation isn't just something that happens to you, it's something that can be manufactured, shaped, and weaponized by people who understand how information moves. Hugo Yeon is a kind of propagandist, someone who trades in stories and names, who can inflate a nobody into a legend or tear a reputation to shreds. And that reveals a whole hidden layer of the Union's power. It doesn't just control territory through fists. It controls the narrative, the flow of fear and reputation that governs how everyone in the district understands who to respect and who to dread. That's a sophisticated idea for a fighting story to explore, and it deepens our sense of what Gray is up against. Because it means the White Mamba legend isn't just organic gossip, it's partly a product being shaped by people with an interest in shaping it. Gray's reputation has been taken out of his hands entirely, molded by storytellers into whatever serves their purposes. And once your legend belongs to other people, you've lost control of your own story. The Union can make the White Mamba into a hero or a monster, a threat to be feared or a target to be destroyed, and Gray has no say in any of it. The introduction of figures like Dean Kwon and Jake G does important emotional work too, because it keeps making the enemy more concrete. It would be easy for the Union to remain a vague, faceless mass, but the story refuses that. It insists on giving us names, ranks, personalities, so that when the war comes, we understand it's being waged by specific, formidable people, not an abstraction. Each name added is another weight on the scale, another reason to fear for Eunjang, another piece of evidence that the school is hopelessly outmatched by the sheer depth of the Union's bench. And yet, the more thoroughly the Union is revealed, the more you start to notice what its careful accounting leaves out. The Union measures everything: strength, rank, territory, reputation. It has a number for every fighter and a place for every school. But there are things that don't show up on that ledger, things like loyalty that runs deeper than fear, like the willingness to bleed for someone you love, like a strength that comes from grief rather than ambition. The Union system is brilliant at measuring the things it understands. Its blind spot is everything it doesn't, and Gray Yeon lives entirely inside that blind spot. There's a mounting sense of inevitability to these chapters, the feeling of two forces being drawn toward a collision that neither can now avoid. The assembly looms. The Union's pieces are all in place. The rumor has done its work. And Eunjang sits at the center of it all, a small, battered school full of kids who rescue kittens and worry about exams, about to become the target of the most powerful organization in the district. The imbalance is almost unbearable, and that's exactly the point. The story wants you to feel how impossible the odds are, so that whatever happens next lands with full force. By the chapter's end, the Union stands more fully revealed than ever, its ranks filled in, its emergency taking shape, its rumor machine humming, its patient strategy grinding forward. The threat to Eunjang has never felt more concrete or more overwhelming. And in the middle of it all, the legend of the White Mamba keeps growing, carried on the tongues of storytellers toward the assembly and the war beyond. His story was only getting started. The kingdom had counted its strength and found itself mighty, but it had not yet reckoned with the one boy its arithmetic could not contain. This chapter pulls off something remarkable. It takes a story about school fights and suddenly reveals that the real game being played is far larger, far colder, and far more sophisticated than anyone imagined. Because in this chapter, we finally understand what makes Donald not truly dangerous, and it has almost nothing to do with his fists. It has to do with money, with business, with a mind that sees an entire generation of dangerous teenagers not as a gang to lead, but as a resource to be monetized. But before we get there, the chapter grounds us in something more immediate, and it's a perfect little demonstration of who Gray Yeon is. A Union small fry named Colton Choi is running his mouth, talking behind people's backs, mocking, sneering, the way small men do when they think there are no consequences. And Gray, in a school bathroom, teaches him a lesson. Not out of cruelty, but with a kind of grim precision. Because Gray has a philosophy about people who talk trash behind others' backs. Those words always find their way to the person they're about. Talk ugly enough, and eventually the ugliness comes home to you. Colton learns that the hard way. What's striking about the beatdown is how controlled it is. Gray isn't a berserker. He's not enjoying it. He's making a point, delivering a consequence, the way he always does, to someone who mistook the absence of resistance for permission. It's the White Mamba operating exactly as he does, quietly punishing cruelty, protecting the dignity of people who aren't there to defend themselves, and then walking away. Colton is left humbled, and the lesson hangs in the air. Words have weight. Cruelty has a cost. And there is someone, now, willing to collect it. But then the chapter opens a door into a completely different room, and this is where it gets genuinely unsettling. We shift into a corporate setting, a world of offices and managers and business deals, and we meet a man named Mr. Kong, someone connected to a corporation, one whose reach touches the schools themselves through something as mundane as uniforms. And into this world of adults and commerce steps a high schooler with a proposition. That high schooler is Donald Na. And this is the revelation that reframes the entire villain. Because Donald Na isn't just the ruler of a delinquent federation. He's a businessman. He looks at all those schools, all those students, and he doesn't see chaos. He sees a market. He sees a source of income. He talks about the students as a resource, about market share, about the money to be made from controlling and channeling an entire population of young people. He offers to work with the corporation, to be a mentor, a manager, a bridge between the raw power of the streets and the cold profit of the boardroom. Sit with how chilling that is. Every other fighter in this story wants the ordinary things, respect, dominance, the thrill of winning. Donald Na wants something on an entirely different scale. He's building an empire that runs on money, using his absolute control over the Union as the foundation for a business enterprise. The fighting, the territory, the fear, all of it is just infrastructure, the machinery that lets him extract value. He's turned a generation of dangerous kids into a product, and he's selling access to it. This is what makes him such a uniquely frightening antagonist. Gray Yeon can beat any fighter the Union sends. He's proven that. But how do you fight a businessman? How do you punch a market strategy? Donald Na operates on a plane where fists are almost irrelevant, where the real weapons are contracts and connections and the patient accumulation of leverage. He's not a boss to be defeated in a brawl. He's a system to be dismantled, and Gray has no idea, yet, how deep that system goes. The chapter draws a devastating contrast between its two halves. In one, we have Gray Yeon, humbling a small-time cruel boy to protect the dignity of others, using his strength for something almost tender. In the other, we have Donald Na, sitting in an office, calmly discussing how to turn thousands of students into revenue. Two visions of power, side by side. One is personal, protective, grounded in loyalty and grief. The other is vast, cold, and utterly transactional. And the story is quietly asking which of these will win, when they finally collide. There's a horror in realizing that Donald Na sees people, all people, as pieces to be positioned and resources to be exploited. The fighters in his union aren't comrades, they're assets. The students in the schools aren't kids, they're a market. Even the corporate men he deals with are just leverage to be managed. He has mastered a way of seeing the world in which every human being is a means to an end, and that clarity, that total absence of sentiment, is exactly what has made him so successful and so dangerous. Let's really unpack why the businessman reveal is such a masterstroke, because it completely changes the genre of the threat. Up to this point, we've been watching a fighting story, and in a fighting story, the strongest fighter wins. That's a game Gray Yeon can play, and win. But Donald Na has quietly changed the game. He's playing a different sport entirely, one where the currency isn't strength but capital, where the battlefield isn't the street but the boardroom, where victory isn't measured in who's still standing but in who controls the flow of money. And in that game, Gray's fists are almost useless. You can't intimidate a contract. You can't knock out a market strategy. Think about the sheer scale of vision it takes to look at a delinquent federation and see, not a gang, but a business opportunity. Most people at the top of such a structure would be content with the power itself, with the fear and the respect and the dominance. Donald Na sees all of that as merely the raw material for something bigger. The union is his infrastructure, his supply chain, his workforce. The students are his market. And the corporations are his customers and partners. He's built a bridge between the underworld of school violence and the overworld of legitimate business, and he's positioned himself as the indispensable broker standing in the middle, taking his cut of everything that passes through. And here's the truly chilling part. This makes Donald Na almost invulnerable to the kind of justice the story has taught us to crave. We've spent this whole series watching Gray deliver consequences to cruel people, humbling bullies, punishing those who prey on the weak. That works when the villain is a fighter you can beat. But how do you deliver consequences to a businessman? Donald Na can lose every street fight in the district and still win, because his real power was never in his fists. It's in the network he's built, the money he controls, the systems he's woven into the fabric of the whole community. He's made himself into something that a single hero, however strong, cannot simply punch into submission. That's why the two halves of this chapter resonate so powerfully against each other. Gray beating Colton Choi is the story's model of justice at its most satisfying, a cruel person receiving a fitting consequence, the weak protected, the balance restored. It's clean, immediate, physical. And then Donald Na's scene shows us a form of power that exists entirely outside that model, cold, abstract, financial, untouchable by any fist. The chapter is quietly warning us that Gray's usual tools, however formidable, may not be enough this time. The final boss of this world isn't a fighter. He's a system. There's also something deeply unsettling about how Donald Na talks about people, and the chapter wants us to feel it. When he discusses students as a market, as a source of income, as a percentage of market share, he's performing a kind of moral erasure. Real kids, with real lives and fears and dreams, become line items in a business plan. That total reduction of human beings to economic units is its own kind of violence, quieter than a beating but arguably more monstrous, because it scales. Forrest Lee can only hurt the people in front of him. Donald Na can exploit thousands at once, from an office, with a smile, and never throw a single punch. And it recontextualizes everything we've watched. All those fighters, all that territory, all those rumors and assemblies and challenges, they're not the real story to Donald Na. They're just the machinery that generates his profit. The war brewing over Eunjang, so enormous from the ground level, is to him a minor operational matter, the routine management of an asset. That gap between how the characters experience the conflict and how Donald Na sees it is genuinely chilling. To the boys of Eunjang, this is life and death. To the man at the top, it's a spreadsheet. By the chapter's end, the true scope of Donald Na's ambition has come into focus, and it's staggering. The war brewing over Eunjang, which felt like the main event, is revealed to be just one small piece of something much larger, a business empire built on the backs of an entire generation. Gray Yeon punished a boy for talking cruelty, doing the small, decent work he always does. And meanwhile, in a world of offices he'll never see, the true architect of everything was calmly turning children into profit. His story was only getting started. And the enemy he was destined to face turned out to be something no fist could ever fully reach. After chapters of expanding menace, this one brings a burst of warmth, and a new face who complicates everything. Because into the story walks Rowan M, and his arrival is one of those bittersweet moments that weak hero does so well, a reunion that's genuinely joyful on the surface and quietly troubling underneath. Rowan is an old friend of Eugene's, someone from his past, and when the two of them recognize each other, there's real delight in it, the pure happiness of running into someone you thought you'd lost track of. For a moment, the chapter lets us breathe. Eugene lights up. Rowan is friendly, familiar, an emotional anchor from an earlier, simpler chapter of Eugene's life. They talk about the time that's passed, about how things have changed, about the strange coincidence of ending up in the same place again. It's the kind of scene that reminds you these are just teenagers, kids with histories and friendships and lives that existed before all the violence, kids who light up at a familiar face in a crowded hallway. But weak hero rarely lets warmth stay uncomplicated, and there's something about Rowan that doesn't quite add up. Because the Rowan that Eugene remembers and the Rowan standing in front of him aren't entirely the same person. Something has shifted. There's a new edge to him, a different energy, and the story lets that unease build slowly underneath the friendly surface. The boy Eugene knew has changed, and change, in this world, usually means one thing. He's been pulled into the same current of violence that keeps threatening to swallow everyone. Because Rowan Im, we come to understand, is no longer just an ordinary kid. He's become a fighter, and not a minor one. There are whispers of a reputation, of a notorious brutal presence, of a name that carries weight at another school. The gentle familiarity of the reunion sits uncomfortably against this darker truth. Eugene is happy to see his old friend, but his old friend has walked, at least part way, down the very road that Gray keeps warning people away from. It's a quiet tragedy, the kind that hides inside a happy moment. Meanwhile, the machinery of the larger plot keeps grinding forward. The Union's preparations continue, the tension around the coming assembly builds, and names keep surfacing, players positioning themselves for whatever is about to happen. There's talk of fighters, of ranks, of the emergency taking shape around Eunjang. A figure like Dean Kwon looms in the background, part of the gathering pressure. The reunion between Eugene and Rowan is happening on a stage that's slowly filling with danger, even if the two friends can't fully see it yet. And running through it, as always, is Gray Yeon, still trying to hold on to normalcy, still steering his friend toward books and safety. There's a lovely thread in these chapters of Gray as the reluctant tutor, the fighter who keeps insisting the smart path is the quiet one. He wants Eugene focused on studying, on a future that doesn't involve getting hurt. It's Gray's way of loving people, protecting them not just with his fists but by trying to keep them out of the fire entirely. He's seen where the road of violence leads, and he wants better for the people he cares about. The arrival of Rowan Im adds a new kind of tension to that dynamic, though. Because Rowan represents a different influence, a friend from Eugene's past who has embraced exactly the thing Gray keeps warning against. There's a subtle tug-of-war forming, between the quiet, protective path Gray wants for Eugene and the more dangerous world that Rowan now moves in. Eugene is caught in the middle, a soft kid surrounded by fighters, pulled between the friend who wants to shield him and the friend who's been hardened by combat. What makes this chapter resonate is the way it uses a happy reunion to deepen the story's central sadness. This is a world that keeps taking gentle kids and turning them into fighters. Gray watched it happen to himself. Now Eugene is watching it, maybe, having happened to an old friend. Every warm moment is shadowed by the awareness of what this world does to people, how it grinds down softness, how it pulls the ordinary toward the brutal. Rowan's changed face is a reminder that no one gets to stay untouched for long. There's also a sense of the net continuing to tighten. New players keep entering the board, old connections keep resurfacing, and all of it seems to be flowing toward a single point, the assembly, the confrontation, the war that everyone can feel coming. Rowan Im's reappearance isn't just a character beat. It's another thread being woven into the larger tapestry, another piece of a puzzle that's assembling itself around Gray and Eunjang whether they want it or not. Let's think about what Rowan Im represents thematically, because he's more than just a new fighter. He's a living answer to a question the series keeps asking. What happens to the gentle kids in a world like this? We've seen one answer in Gray, a boy hardened by tragedy into a reluctant weapon. We've seen another in Stephen, a boy whose softness was destroyed. And now Rowan offers a third variation, a boy who seems to have chosen the path of violence, or been pulled into it, transforming from the friend Eugene remembers into someone with an edge and a reputation. Each of these is a different outcome of the same brutal pressure, and together they map the tragic range of what this world does to the young. What makes Rowan's arrival so poignant is the specific texture of the reunion. There's genuine joy in it, the uncomplicated happiness of reconnecting with someone from a gentler chapter of your life. Eugene isn't performing that delight, it's real. And that realness is exactly what makes the undercurrent of unease so affecting. Because you can feel Eugene sensing, somewhere underneath his happiness, that his old friend has changed, that the person in front of him isn't quite the person he remembers. It's the particular grief of reunion, discovering that the people you love have kept living and changing while you weren't there to see it, sometimes in directions that hurt. And it complicates Gray's protective project in an interesting way. Because Gray has been working, quietly and persistently, to keep Eugene on the safe path, to steer him toward books and away from fists. Rowan represents a countervailing influence, a friend from Eugene's own past who has embraced the very world Gray wants to shield him from. There's a subtle competition for Eugene's future taking shape, between the friend who wants to protect his softness and the friend who has already lost his own. Eugene is a soft kid standing at a crossroads, surrounded by fighters pulling him in different directions, and the outcome of that pull will say a lot about what kind of person he becomes. There's also a structural elegance to how the story keeps enlarging its web. Rowan doesn't feel like a random new face. He feels like a thread that's been waiting to be pulled, a connection from the past resurfacing at exactly the moment the present is heating up. Everything in these chapters seems to be converging, old friends, new enemies, gathering fighters, all flowing toward the same point of collision. The reappearance of someone from Eugene's history is another sign that the story is drawing its scattered pieces together, tightening the weave, preparing for the moment when all these threads snap taut at once. And beneath it all runs the series' abiding sadness about what violence does to the gentle. Rowan's changed face is a quiet warning, a reminder that no one in this world gets to stay soft for free. The same pressures that forged Gray, that broke Stephen, are at work on everyone, grinding away at their kindness, hardening their edges, pulling them toward the brutal. Every warm reunion in this story is shadowed by the awareness of that pressure, by the knowledge that the people we love are always at risk of being changed into someone we don't recognize. It's what gives even the happy moments their ache. By the chapter's end, the warmth of the reunion has curdled into something more complicated, joy. Tangled up with worry, an old friendship shadowed by the changes that violence carves into people. Rowan Im has arrived, familiar and yet different, a reminder of what this world does to the people caught in it. The Union's plans keep advancing in the background, and Gray keeps trying to hold his small circle of peace together against the gathering dark. His story was only getting started. And the reunion that should have been simple happiness had instead become one more sign that the quiet life Gray fought for was slipping further out of reach. There's a beautiful, almost funny gentleness at the center of this chapter, and it's the thing that keeps reminding you what Gray Yun is really fighting for. Because in the middle of a story about gathering war and brutal fighters, we get Gray Yun patiently tutoring Eugene, coaching him not on how to throw a punch, but on how to study. It's a small, warm, deeply human scene, and it tells you everything about the life Gray is trying to build and protect in the eye of the storm. Watch how Gray approaches it. He gives Eugene real, practical advice about learning, about how the fun of studying only begins once you start seeing actual results, about improving efficiency, about the discipline it takes to build knowledge instead of just memorizing. There's something almost tender in it. This is a boy who could be anything in the violent world around him, choosing instead to sit with his friend and help him get better at school. It's Gray insisting, once again, that the real path forward isn't through fists. It's through the ordinary, unglamorous work of building a future. And that insistence is Gray's whole philosophy, distilled. He's not tutoring Eugene because he cares about grades. He's doing it because he's trying to keep his friend on the safe road, the road that doesn't lead to hospital beds and shattered lives. Every hour Eugene spends studying is an hour he's not getting pulled into the violence. Gray is using the only tools he has, patience, attention, quiet guidance, to shield the people he loves from the fate he knows too well. It's protection disguised as a study session. But the chapter doesn't let the peace last, because the world Gray is trying to hold at bay keeps pressing in. We deepen our understanding of Rowan Im, Eugene's changed old friend, and the darker reputation trailing behind him. And the story introduces the looming presence of a genuinely frightening figure, a notorious brutal fighter known by a fearsome nickname, a presence at another school that carries real menace. The gentle tutoring scene is sandwiched between reminders that the fighters are gathering, that the violence is closing in, that the safe road Gray wants for Eugene is getting narrower by the day. And then comes a piece of news that changes the whole shape of things. Gray Yeon is scheduled to become a Eunjang student. He's transferring in. The reluctant fighter, the boy who wants nothing more than to keep his head down, is about to plant himself directly in the school that the entire union is preparing to crush. It's a development loaded with irony and dread. Gray wants peace, but he's walking straight into the center of the coming war, into the very institution that's become the union's target. There's something quietly fateful about that transfer. Gray isn't seeking conflict, he never does. But circumstance keeps positioning him exactly where the storm will hit hardest. By becoming a Eunjang student, he's tying his fate to the fate of the school, to Ben Park and the other fighters, to the underdogs the union wants to destroy. Whether he intends it or not, he's about to become part of Eunjang's fight, and given who Gray is, given that he can't look away when the weak are being ground down, we already know how that's going to go. The chapter keeps drawing that essential contrast between the two worlds Gray straddles. On one side, the study session, the patient tutoring, the ordinary dream of a normal life. On the other, the gathering fighters, the brutal reputations, the union's advancing plans. Gray lives with one foot in each, and the tragedy is that he can't fully commit to the peaceful one no matter how hard he tries. The violent world keeps reaching for him, and his own nature keeps answering the call, every time cruelty puts itself in his path. Eugene, meanwhile, remains the heart of it all, the soft kid these harder boys keep orbiting. His friendship with Gray is one of the warmest things in the series, built on genuine care rather than shared violence. And his old bond with Rowan adds a poignant complication, a reminder that the people we love can be changed by this world in ways we can't control. Eugene is surrounded by fighters, pulled between influences, a gentle soul in a hardening landscape, and Gray keeps trying to keep him safe in the only ways he knows. What makes this chapter land is the way it holds tenderness and dread in perfect balance. The study session is genuinely sweet, a glimpse of the ordinary happiness that's possible, the life worth protecting. And the surrounding menace is genuinely frightening, the brutal fighters, the union's plans, the transfer that's about to put Gray in the crossfire. The contrast makes both feel more real. You care about the quiet moments precisely because you can feel how fragile they are. Let's dwell on the quiet radicalism of a fighting story that keeps insisting the real answer is to study. Because it would be so easy for weak hero to glorify violence, to make Gray's fists the solution to every problem, to turn the whole thing into a power fantasy. Instead, again and again, the story puts its most capable fighter in a chair with a textbook, telling his friend that the smart path is the peaceful one. That's a genuinely subversive message for the genre. It says that strength isn't the point, that the ability to hurt people is not something to aspire to, that the truly admirable thing is to build a life rather than to dominate others. Gray is a legend among fighters, and he spends his free time trying to convince his friend that fighting is a trap. And the tragedy woven through that message is that Gray can't take his own advice. He tells Eugene to walk the peaceful road, but his own nature keeps dragging him back onto the violent one. Every time cruelty appears, he answers it. Every time the weak are threatened, he steps in. He preaches peace and lives war, not because he's a hypocrite, but because he's trapped between what he wants and what he is. He wants the quiet life he's prescribing for Eugene. He just can't have it, because the same conscience that makes him protect people is the thing that keeps pulling him into the fire. That gap between his advice and his fate is one of the most quietly heartbreaking things about him. The news of his transfer to Eunjang lands with such force precisely because of that gap. Here is a boy who wants peace, deliberately enrolling in the school that's about to become a war zone. On the surface it looks like the worst possible decision. But it's also, in a way, deeply true to who Gray is. Some part of him, whether he admits it or not, is drawn toward the place where he'll be needed, toward the underdogs who are about to be hunted. He tells himself he just wants to study. But he keeps positioning himself exactly where his particular kind of strength will matter most, as if his conscience is making choices his conscious mind won't fully own. There's a lovely dramatic irony in imagining Gray trying to be a normal student at Eunjang. He'll want to keep his head down, attend classes, focus on exams, be invisible. And the school around him will be descending into open warfare with the most powerful organization in the district. The very idea of Gray Yeon, quiet transfer student, trying to blend into the background of a school under siege is almost funny, except that we know how it will go. His invisibility won't last a single crisis. The moment someone weak is threatened, the White Mamba will surface, and the peaceful student will vanish behind the reluctant hero. And that's the engine that will drive everything to come. Gray at Eunjang is a lit match in a room full of gunpowder. He doesn't want to ignite anything. He wants to sit in the corner and read. But his presence, his nature, his refusal to look away from cruelty, all of it guarantees that he'll become the center of the coming storm. The Union is planning to crush Eunjang, and they have no idea that the school they've targeted is about to gain the one student most capable of turning their careful plans to ash. The transfer isn't just a plot point. It's the fuse. By the chapter's end, the die is cast. Gray Yeon is bound for Eunjang, walking, with his usual reluctance, straight into the heart of the coming war. The fighters are gathering, the brutal reputations are circling, and the safe, studious life Gray wants for himself and his friend has never felt more precious or more threatened. His story was only getting started. And the boy who only ever wanted to study was about to enroll in the one school where studying would be the last thing anyone had time for. This chapter slows down and shows you the small, human hearts beating underneath all the violence, and it does it in the rain, with a kitten, which is about as tender as weak hero ever gets. Because before the war truly begins, the story wants to remind you exactly what kind of people are caught up in it, and why they're worth caring about. The rain comes down, and in it we find one of Eunjang's own, a blonde fighter, doing something that has nothing to do with fighting at all. He's found a kitten, a small helpless thing shivering in the wet, and despite his tough exterior, despite the fact that he's a brawler in a brutal world, he can't just leave it there. He picks it up. He worries over it. He brings it in out of the storm. And when he's caught doing this soft, caring thing, he's embarrassed, flustered, the way tough kids get when someone catches them being gentle. It's a small moment, but it's the whole thesis of the series in miniature, that real strength and real tenderness live in the same people. That's what weak hero keeps insisting, chapter after chapter. The fighters we're watching aren't monsters. They're kids, capable of cruelty but also of kindness, of protecting a stray animal in the rain, of caring about things that can't fight back. And the story lines these tender moments up right alongside the gathering violence precisely so you'll feel the stakes. When the Union comes to crush Eunjang, it won't be crushing faceless thugs. It'll be crushing boys who rescue kittens, boys with soft hearts hidden under hard shells. The rain itself does quiet emotional work here, the umbrellas, the gray light, the hush of a storm. It's the kind of weather that slows the world down and lets feeling seep in. And in that atmosphere, the story weaves its threads of connection and tension together. There's the warmth of friendship, the awkwardness of tough kids caught being kind, and underneath it all, the ever-present awareness that harder days are coming. The peace is temporary. Everyone can feel it, even if no one says it out loud. But this being weak hero, the gentleness shares the frame with menace. There's Gerard Jin, and a confrontation loaded with old grievance, a sense of something that's been building, something that's about to be settled. The fighters keep circling each other, keep testing the boundaries, and even in a chapter this soft at its center, the threat of violence is never far away. A confrontation simmers, a score waits to be settled, and the calm of the rain is shot through with the electricity of conflict about to break. And Yeon, as always, moves through it doing what he does. When cruelty shows itself, when bullies push at the people around him, he answers. Not with joy, not with excess, but with the quiet, decisive force that's become his signature. He protects. He steps in. He makes the cruel think twice. It's the same pattern we've watched all along, the reluctant fighter who won't seek out war but won't stand aside while the weak get ground down either. Even here, in the rain, that pattern holds. There's also a thread that keeps the larger story moving, the sense that the cast is assembling, that fighters are converging on Eunjang from every direction. Roan Eugene's changed old friend, is drawn further into the orbit of the school and the coming conflict. Everyone seems to be flowing toward the same place, the same fight, as if the story is gathering all its pieces onto a single board before knocking them into motion. The rain-soaked calm is really the quiet before something enormous. What makes this chapter special is its restraint. After all the world building, all the Union's cold plans and expanding menace, weak hero pauses to remind you of the softness at the core of everyone involved. The kitten in the rain isn't a distraction from the story. It's the point of it. These are the people the war will hurt. This is the tenderness the violence will threaten. And by making you feel that softness so clearly, the story raises the stakes of everything to come. There's a poignancy in watching these boys be kind, knowing what's bearing down on them. The blonde fighter fussing over his kitten has no idea of the full scale of the Union's plans, the strategy being drawn up in offices and hallways he'll never see. He's just a kid trying to keep a small living thing safe from the rain. And that innocence, that ordinary decency, is exactly what makes the coming assault feel like such a violation. The Union sees Eunjang as a target, a market, a problem. We see it as a place full of boys who rescue kittens. Let's appreciate how deliberately the story uses this quiet chapter as emotional armor for what's coming. Weak hero knows that spectacle means nothing without stakes, and stakes come from caring. So before it unleashes the Union's assault, it spends a chapter making absolutely sure we love these boys, that we see their tenderness, their embarrassment, their capacity for gentleness. The kitten in the rain isn't a detour from the plot. It's the plot's foundation, the reason the coming violence will land as tragedy rather than mere action. You have to love what's threatened before the threat can truly hurt. And there's a deep truth in the image of a tough fighter secretly caring for a helpless creature. Because it captures the exact paradox at the heart of the whole series. These boys have learned to be hard, to fight, to survive in a brutal world. But hardness is a shell, not a soul. Underneath it, the softness is still there, the instinct to protect, to nurture, to care for something smaller and weaker than yourself. The world has taught them to hide that softness, to be embarrassed by it. But it never quite kills it. And that surviving tenderness, that stubborn kindness under the armor, is the thing that makes them worth rooting for, and the thing the coming war will put to the test. By the chapter's end, the rain has done its work, softening the world for a moment, letting the humanity of these fighters shine through before the storm of the Union's assault breaks over them. The tenderness and the tension sit side by side, the kindness and the coming cruelty, and you understand, more than ever, why this fight matters. His story was only getting started. And the boys who would soon stand against an entire empire were, in this quiet rain-soaked moment, just kids caring for a kitten, worth protecting precisely because of the softness the world was about to test. This is the chapter where the waiting ends and the machine finally moves. Everything the story has been building, all the world building, all the gathering names, all the cold strategy, snaps into action here as the Yeongdeungpo Union launches its coordinated plan to crush Eunjang once and for all. It's the moment the storm makes landfall, and it arrives with the chilling efficiency of an organization that has done this many times before. We open with violence already unfolding, one of the Union's fighters, Forrest Lee, and his team moving as part of the larger operation. And the way it plays out tells you everything about the Union's method. This isn't a fair fight, a challenge, a single duel of honor. It's a hunt. A coordinated strike. The Union has been studying Eunjang, mapping its fighters, learning its weaknesses, and now it's putting all that patient reconnaissance to use. The pieces have been positioned. The trap has been laid. And the order comes down to spring it. The plan itself is coldly brilliant, and it's pure Donald Na. The strategy is to wait until Eunjang's fighters split up, until they scatter across the district on their separate ways, and then to strike each of them in isolation. As soon as they split, the Union executes. Divide and conquer, the oldest and cruelest strategy there is. Don't let the underdogs stand together where they might support each other. Catch them alone, one by one, and break them separately. It's the kind of plan that treats human beings like targets on a board, and it reveals the machine mind running the whole operation. What makes this so effective, dramatically, is that the Union has done its homework. They've identified all of Eunjang's key pieces. Ben Park, Alex Go, Gerard Jin, and the mysterious White Mamba, the rumor that started all of this, the fighter whose emergence put Eunjang back on the Union's radar in the first place. The Union has names now, faces, a full accounting of the threat. And with that accounting complete, the order goes out that chills everything. Pick them all off, starting now. The hunt is on, and every Eunjang fighter is prey. There's a terrible momentum to this chapter, the sense of a plan long in the making finally being unleashed. All those earlier chapters of the Union cataloging its strength, spreading rumors, positioning its people, they were the slow drawing back of a bowstring. This is the release. And you feel the vulnerability of Eunjang so acutely because you've spent chapters getting to know these boys as people, as kids who rescue kittens and worry about exams, and now they're scattered across the district with an organized army closing in on each of them alone. The Union's confidence radiates off every panel. They believe this is a solved problem. They've done the analysis, run the numbers, positioned their forces. To them, Eunjang is a target that's already as good as crushed, a fallen school that made the mistake of drawing attention and now has to be put back down. There's an arrogance to it, the arrogance of a power that has never lost, that assumes its careful strategy makes the outcome inevitable. And that arrogance is precisely the thing the story has been quietly setting up to shatter. Because there's one variable the Union's beautiful plan hasn't fully accounted for, and we know exactly who it is. The White Mamba isn't just another name on their target list. He's a fighter powered by something their entire system can't touch, a boy who won't break the way they expect, who can't be intimidated or bought or predicted. The Union has planned for fighters who want the ordinary things, who can be isolated and frightened into submission. They haven't planned for Gray Yun, who fights not for himself but for the people around him, and who becomes most dangerous precisely when the weak are under threat. That's the delicious tension the chapter leaves us with. The Union's plan is designed to exploit isolation, to catch Eunjang's fighters alone and break them. But that same plan puts Union thugs directly in the path of the one person who cannot stand by while others are hurt. By scattering to hunt Eunjang's boys one by one, the Union is unknowingly walking its people into the White Mamba's path over and over again. The strategy that's meant to guarantee victory may be the very thing that unleashes the fighter most capable of ruining it. And underneath the strategy, the story keeps its human stakes vivid. These aren't abstract pieces being knocked off a board. They're Ben Park, Alex Go, Gerard Jin, the boys we've come to know, now hunted through the streets by a coordinated force that wants them broken. The intimacy of the earlier chapters pays off here as dread. We don't want these kids to get caught alone. We've seen their softness, their humanity, and now we watch an organized machine move to grind it down. It makes the coming clashes feel personal in a way that raw spectacle never could. There's also the sense that this is a point of no return. The Union has committed. The order has been given. There's no more circling, no more rumor and preparation, only the execution of the plan. Eunjang is under attack, its fighters scattered and hunted, and the war that's been looming since the first whisper of the White Mamba is finally, fully here. Whatever happens next, there's no going back to the quiet. Let's dwell on the cold intelligence of the divide and conquer plan, because it reveals exactly how Donald Na's mind works and exactly where it's vulnerable. The strategy is, on its own terms, flawless. Eunjang's strength, such as it is, lies in its fighters standing together, supporting each other, presenting a united front. So the Union's answer is elegantly simple. Don't let them stand together. Wait for them to scatter, catch each one alone, and the collective threat dissolves into a series of easy, isolated victories. It's the reasoning of a strategist who understands that a group is often far stronger than the sum of its individuals, and who has built his whole approach around never letting the enemy fight as a group. But every strategy carries the seed of its own undoing, and this one is no exception. Because the plan depends on isolation working in the Union's favor, on their hunters being the predators and Eunjang's boys being the prey. And that assumption holds only as long as none of those isolated targets turns out to be more dangerous alone than the whole group would have been together. The Union has scattered its forces across the district precisely so they can pick off lone targets. But in doing so, they've created dozens of small, isolated encounters, any one of which might put a handful of Union thugs face to face with the very fighter their whole plan was designed to neutralize. They've spread themselves thin, and thin is exactly how a lone predator likes his prey. There's a beautiful irony building here that the Union can't see. Their entire strategy is optimized against ordinary fighters, people who are stronger in groups and weaker alone, people who can be isolated and broken. But Gray Yun is the inverse of that. He's not a team player who needs support. He's a lone force who becomes most lethal precisely in the isolated, one against many situations the Union is busy manufacturing all over the district. By scattering to hunt Eunjang, the Union hasn't neutralized the White Mamba. They've created the exact conditions in which he's most devastating, and they've done it dozens of times over, at dozens of points across the map. And the human dimension of it all is what makes the chapter ache. Because we know these targets. Ben Park, Alex Go, Gerard Jin, they're not abstractions on the Union's kill list, they're kids we've watched, kids with histories and fears and the capacity for kindness we saw so clearly in the rain. Now they're scattered and hunted, each of them alone against an organized force that wants them broken. The intimacy the story built so carefully turns, in this chapter, into pure dread. We don't want to watch these boys get caught. And the Union, seeing only names on a list, moves to catch them anyway. The point of no return has a terrible finality to it. For chapters, the war was a thing that loomed, a threat on the horizon, something that could still, maybe, be avoided. That possibility dies here. Donald Na's order has been given. The hunters are moving. Eunjang is under coordinated attack, its fighters scattered and vulnerable, and there's no more waiting, no more circling, no more chance to step back from the edge. Whatever happens now, it happens in the open, in the middle of a war that has finally, fully begun. The quiet that Gray fought so hard to protect is gone, and it isn't coming back. By the chapter's end, the trap has sprung, the hunt has begun, and the fate of Eunjang hangs in the balance. The Union moves with cold, coordinated precision, picking off its targets one by one, confident in a strategy it believes cannot fail. But somewhere out in that scattered, storm-threatened district is a boy the Union underestimated from the start, a reluctant fighter whose whole nature is to answer exactly this kind of cruelty. His story was only getting started. The Empire had made its move at last, and it was about to learn, the hard way, why you should never scatter your hunters through the territory of the one predator you failed to understand.